we had a few conversations, right, in August 2023. So as you said, it's been a minute. And that
Forever.
was a great one. That has all the context. Actually, that is also has the context from our first pairing session. Then we had a few pairing sessions, 2, if I recall correctly. And then issue 486. We can open it up. This was where we stopped. With the problem, we've seen the cache misses increase. And this went for a while.
It did. We had tried to change a little bit of the sort of early header processing and routing at the CDN layer in Fastly. And initial tests looked like it worked, but it changed something about caching. And we never got to the end of that.
Yeah, shielded was an issue. Hosts were an issue. We went through a few things. I was giving the 2 VCL configs, 175 and 176. Everything looked good, but it didn't work as expected. So like lots and lots of issues like this where things were just not looking good. So basically, I had to revert back for the fees to work correctly. All sorts of issues. It culminated with this. It culminated with the idea that, hey, maybe, just maybe, we should try and build a CDN. So here we are today, right?
Yeah.
Trying to build a CDN. First step.
Well, let's be clear about the ambition here. We're not actually trying to build first of all, we're not multi-tenant, right? So it's a CDN for one purpose. And secondly, we are not building the hardware. We are not managing the data centers. We are just deploying some software into a distributed cloud system. Great. Okay. That is a CDN I think we can build. In fact, Fly.io have their own webpage on how to build a CDN on Fly.io.
Yes, that's correct. Yes. The 5-hour CDN, that's it. This was posted back in by Kurt Mackey, the CEO of Fly, March 16th, 2021. So that's been a few years now.
Now, there are some features that this style of CDN are going to miss from Fastly. I don't think they're particularly important for the change log or use case or things like it. Active purge is very difficult unless you have some sort of orchestration mechanism, some sort of message publishing. But active purge is really necessary when you have fast moving API data. Let's say you have, tweets for that a user is following, some sort of messages or comments on a blog post. Anybody could change that at any time. You want to be able to purge that. You want to be able to cache that. This is not that.
Yeah, that's it. Yes.
If you want to purge one thing with a purge request, that's totally achievable with a standard Varnish setup.
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
Yep.
Expectations set.
Cool. Great. So with that in mind, let's see. Let's keep this open on this side. Okay. So that's where this is going. And the idea is like to have a couple of Varnish nodes in a few places, and let's see how they will behave. So 7 steps. That was step number 1. I'm going to run it again. We're going to take the public Varnish image. This is on Docker Hub. And we're going to explore it to see what is there. I think the most important thing here is the version 7.4.2, which is a fairly recent version of Varnish. I think one thing which will be relevant for us is the Varnish size. It has 100 megabytes. That's something that we'll need to tweak. The other thing is the work directory etc Varnish, and there's a specific VCL that it's expecting to have. And there was something about a module, because we are pulling a module in, and it's something called, don't have experience with this, something called vmod dynamic commit. Do you know what that is? Vmod dynamic?
I do not, but I'm going to read it.
Yeah, that's something that's going to come up. So we will come across that. But fairly standard, Varnish 7.4.2 with some defaults, which are great for development. By default, it's exposing port 80, but we will configure that because there'll be some issues binding to port 80. And then port 8443 is the proxy port. I don't know whether we will need to use it. So I had to play with port 80, and that seems to be the one that works. But there's also the proxy one. Okay, so that was step number one. Step number two, I would like us to have a look at the varnish container image command. This is in the entry point, the one that will start the container, and this will be important when it comes to the different the default options. So varnish D, that is the process that will get started. We have dash F, which again, having looked at this, it means run in foreground. And then we have a couple of options. Dash F, this is important because it tells us where to load the VCL from. And if we want to
Mhm,
change this, we'll need to overwrite it.
mhm,
So for the intents of this, for the purposes of this, we'll be putting the VCL in that on that path. Varnish HTTP port, this is something which we will configure because we'll have issues binding to port 80.
correct.
And then the varnish proxy, we're going to leave it as is. Maybe we'll get to it, maybe we won't, I don't know. Features, HTTP2, that was an interesting
Mhm,
one. And we'll see what other
mhm.
features there are, just like to have a quick look. Anything that jumps at you, anything that looks interesting?
My recollection of Fly, and it's been a year since I've worked with it, is that they are going to inject a port environment variable that they have spun the container up on. And I use container loosely because I think this Docker image is going to get converted into a Firecracker image.
That is correct, yes.
Okay.
Anything in
Yeah.
the options that you think we should have and we don't have, or anything that,
Nothing yet. Nothing off
cool,
the top of my head.
great. Step number three, I'm just basically building the image locally. And again, I already have this, I've already ran this before. It just basically takes the Docker file and applies a few things. Again, very simple, very straightforward. We can look at that in a minute. And then I was looking at all the various options that Varnish D can take. These are the flags. Is there anything in here that you think we should be using? Any of these options that we may want to use, just to take a note of them or to call them out at this
Let's
point?
read. The only one I'm going to mention is the default TTL. You're going to want a default TTL of some sort. There's going to be one set by default. I'm not sure what Varnishes is by default. We can investigate that. My intuition is that it will be more maintainable, readable, debuggable if you set that in VCL rather than in, let's call it Unix land. Um, so I would just avoid it unless we find some need for it.
Yep, that
The
sounds good.
others, nothing speaks to me as something we should dig into ahead of time.
Okay. Okay.
Hash specification, maybe. We're going to want to be able to configure the hash algorithm for certain um, requests, but I don't think we really care the hash algorithm. I think we care about the hash inputs,
Right.
right? We want to use this header and omit this header, or use this query param and omit this query param um, for caching. I don't think we care about the hash algorithm
Yep.
unless there's performance constraints or something. So I
Yep.
think continue on.
So moving on, again, all I did, varnish D with a question mark, pass it to LVIM. So that's exactly what we're doing there. And we have another one. This is for all the parameters. And there's a lot of parameters that Varnish has. This is actually 1,500 lines. It's fairly comprehensive. I am just calling it out. I don't know whether we want to look at anything against like a lot of lines of code.
My recommendation is I'm not super familiar with most of these.
Okay.
There might be a couple that I happen to have been in a conversation on. My recommendation is that we skip these,
Okay.
and if we run into something, come back, circle back.
Okay. Great.
These I don't want to call them advanced, but I think they are really dependent on the world you're living in. And
Okay.
until we know more about that, um, maybe somebody who's really a varnish expert would be able to immediately pick off some of these. I think
Okay.
we need to know more before we dig into this stuff.
Sounds good. Cool. So we're going to close this. And that brings us to number 6, where, there you go. This is exactly the issue which I was telling you, where I'm trying to run in a way that we can experiment locally. So I'm basically mounting the default VCL. in a way that we can modify it. Now, the problem is I'm using the -d option, and -d, just to run it in debug mode, is incompatible with -f. So that's something that doesn't work. So let's fix that really quickly.
It looked from the docs to me like -d sort of incorporates -f. So if we could remove -f from the entry point,
I see.
then -d might handle that for us.
Yeah, if we do that, we will need to set up some sort of a supervisor. So right now, Varnish D is the process that runs in the foreground and it blocks. That's why the container does not exit. If we change that, then we will need to do something about that. And I think it's okay for now. So this is what happens if we mount so we are mounting the VCL. As I mentioned, the default VCL, we can modify it locally, and there's a way like to quickly reload it. So this is bound on port 8080. I connect to that host on port 9000. This is the default response.
Okay.
Backend fetch failed. I'm going to refresh it, and boom. That's interesting. So let's open up a file, import dynamic, vmod dynamic for backend name resolution, backend default none, subcl init. This is what makes that happen. So we have the request host and we had the backend set up. And that's why this works the way it does. So why do we get redirected? We are going to port 80, and there's a redirect to go to HTTPS. So my assumption is if we were hitting HTTPS directly, we would not be seeing this redirect.
So if Varnish itself were serving on 443, when it makes the proxy request to that origin is actually returning the redirect because it got a request on 80
Correct.
instead of on
Yes
443. So if we change 6 from
6
80
above, yeah.
to 443.
Okay. There is varnish reload. Okay, there you go. So this will basically apply the new config. Great. And now let me do the same thing with HTTP stat. So we keep getting the same response. We see the age. So this hasn't changed in 110 seconds. So how do we purge that?
You can purge that with a purge request to Varnish. Here is a little bit of code for you. What we're going to do is in VCL receive, check if the request method is purge, all caps, and we're just going to do it before you're going to modify the host. Actually, that's a good question. What are we going to purge? So right now, the key that you're caching under is the key that is calculated at the end of VCL receive, I believe. So the key is going to be changelog 2024-01-12.fly.dev / whatever URL, query params, etc. It's fine to cache under that key. It's also fine to cache under the original host key. I generally prefer caching under the original. I find it to be just a little more intuitive. But
yeah, that sounds
the
good.
The difference is not massive. So for that, I would put this if block, this if request method equals purge, above. So up
this one.
3 lines. Yep, that block. Yep. And so let's read this code. It's saying if we're making a purge HTTP request, so get, post, put, delete, purge, a custom method. We can send any method we want. We're going to support this custom purge method. The next line says, if not client IP is a member of purge. Purge is we'll call it a local variable. It's an ACL defined above. We don't have to have that. You could not apply any authorization on purging, at least for now. You could run this in production and let people purge your CDN. That may not be a blocker. Like that's Fastly allows, unless you turn on a certain
I've
feature,
seen that.
Fastly allows public
I've seen
purges,
that.
right?
That's a default. Yeah.
it's not necessarily a bad thing. It can make, it might be worth, it's just a cache.
Yep. Got
It's
it.
not deleting your core data. So
Got it.
there you go.
Okay. Let's try that.
And then you'll want to purge. Just make the same request, but with a purge instead of a get.
200 purged. So let's rerun the same request. What do we get? Backend fetch failed. We have seen this one before.
Interesting. Okay.
So let's run it again. Backend fetch failed. Backend fetch failed. Okay. This matches my experience when I try to change, again, very limited, I tried this maybe 30 minutes ago to change this port to 443. And when I did that, it didn't work. Now, one thing which I even mentioned here in the to-dos is like a list of things that maybe we'll get to, maybe we won't. Running in debug mode, just so that we see a bit more information, would have been very helpful. But if we run in debug mode, we can't run in foreground mode. So that's a bit, but maybe there's a way to configure Varnish through the VCL to run in debug.
I believe so. Can you just try removing the F and running in debug mode? All right, so now let's start. Great.
I was expecting some sort of output, especially when I run in debug mode, but I'm not seeing that.
Agreed. Are we writing any logs?
Where would we configure that?
By default, Varnish will not log anywhere. You have to run a command to get it to show logs. Varnish NCSA.
Okay, so I'm running Varnish NCSA. There we go. Okay.
Okay.
That's
Good.
very helpful.
So let's just make a mental note or a note in a to-do somewhere that we probably want to run Varnish NCSA in a background process in our container.
Okay, so let's do to-do. So running debug mode, we kind of figured that out, how to do debug mode, right? So that's, I just put a tick in there. And then let's do a mental note. We'll need a supervisor.
And it will also need some sort of log drain, right? Because we don't want to just fill up fly disks.
We can figure that out.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're still here configuring HTTPS for app backend. Now we can't even query the backend. So there's something else that we must be missing.
So you have d.backend. Where did that line of code come from?
So basic usage, create a default VCL. This is where I took the starting point, and the only change which I've done, I've changed the host and the backend. That's it.
Can you follow that link on the dynamic director?
Yep. This one.
Yep.
What would you like me to search for?
I just want to know why we're using it. Why is it recommended? Why is it part of this default VCL?
This module provides a Varnish director for dynamic creation of backends based on calls to the system's network address resolution service, which in turn typically uses information from the ECC host file.
I see. All right. So it's the thing that's going to let us use DNS.
Yep.
Okay. / the host file if we happened to want to hard code things. Okay. All right. Can we try not using this vmod dynamic?
Yes, we can try.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, let's
okay.
just that backend lines 8 through 19.
8 through 19. Okay, cool.
Yeah, let's try that instead of backend default none and import dynamic.
Is it okay to keep VCL 4.1 or shall we go to 4.0?
Let's keep 4.1.
4.1, okay. Great.
Change
default.
One thing at a time.
Yep, I like that.
You can just comment the backend default none. Oh yeah.
Yep.
And that host can be a DNS name.
First by timeout, that's a bit excessive. 10 seconds.
5 seconds?
Yeah, 5 seconds. Yeah, 5
I mean,
is
if
good.
it's fly, it should be responding very quickly.
Yep. Probe is health, timeout, that seems good. We can come back and configure those.
Yeah, all of those seem fine for now. And then instead of set request backend hint, we can just set request backend. In fact, we don't even need to to do that at all. You can just comment that line or remove it. You do want to keep the host. Let's try that.
Okay. I'm going to control C this. I'm going to do varnish reload. And I remember why we had this. Okay, compile now active. Great. I will also, let me put the NCSA back. And now let me again. Yeah.
But no more information than that.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Did we put it in the
okay.
right place? Like this was VCL receive? Should it go
Mhm.
like in another, how do you call it, like subroutines?
Subroutine is the right word for that, but I think vcell receive is the correct place to put that. That's the first thing that gets hit. I have a couple of other ideas.
Yeah, sure.
So I have a hypothesis, which is that we are failing to properly validate the certificate. Maybe Varnish is expecting a certain TLS version that Fly isn't supporting. Too recent, too old, something like that, doesn't support the algorithm, some sort of TLS connection error.
I did a backend list, by the way, and I can see that the backend is sick. That's what it says. Health is sick.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There isn't any more info.
Okay, let's try making a couple more changes to the backend. There's some more information on using TLS.
Okay.
Oh, and we can set the host header in the backend, which is
Mm-hmm.
nice.
Okay. Very useful. Yes, indeed. So that means that we don't
So
need this.
correct. We're going to
Okay.
move that logic up into the definition.
Okay.
And then we also want to set dot host header in there.
Isn't that the first one?
No,
This
that's the host. So the host is going to say, resolve this address and connect to the IP address you get back. The
okay.
host header is going to be set the host header, change
Mm-hmm.
the host header from changelog.com to changelog, I'm sorry, from
Yeah. I know
from
what you mean.
changelog.com or localhost to changelog
Localhost, yeah.
2024. Yeah.
Okay.
And I would put it right under the host header. And the reason, just for posterity, the reason this is important, I'm sure you know this, is that Fly is going to do reverse proxying based
Yes.
on the host header.
Correct.
It
Okay.
wouldn't know what client to pick up otherwise.
Okay. Let's do a reload.
Mm-hmm.
Shoot.
Ha! So we don't have the SSL extension. That's the problem.
That's it. That makes sense. Great. Okay.
Well, at
Wow.
least you have a next thing to chase down. Great.
Yeah. Extensions. Do they mention about extensions? Extra arguments? Yeah. How do we install extensions? Is it a vmod? Is that what it is?
It probably is a vmod.
Okay. So install one, possibly multiple vmods. Is there a way to list what mods are available?
Probably.
What is Varnish stat?
It's also only available in Varnish Enterprise.
What, SSL?
Yeah.
Varn. Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, well, this is not going to work then, is it? Okay. If you have any ideas as to what we are missing here, or if you are curious to see what happens next, drop a comment below.